Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know Melissa mentioned that I'm kind of an expert in Irish history, but while I was working at the Tenement Museum in New York, a lot of my job dealt with teaching people about individuals in the past who didn't have a lot of money, who didn't have a lot of means. So that's why I'm very excited to do this program for all of you. Because for those of us with ancestors who were destitute or poor, finding records for them can be a little bit of a challenge because these are people who typically didn't own land, so they're not going to necessarily be found in land records. They often had no estate to be divided, so they might not have had a will or estates that were probated. And they also moved around a lot, frequently looking for employment. So what we're going to do is we're going to briefly talk about the history of the relief system in the United States, the types of poorhouse records and other names to search for them. We're also going to explore a few places you can find some of these records. Now, I will not necessarily be able to tell you exactly where to find poorhouse records for every single tiny institution in any given county in the United States, which honestly, that would be a really awesome superpower. I wish I could. But my goal here is to give you guys some ideas of where you might be able to find these records. Genealogy is definitely detective work, so sometimes we have to think a little bit outside the box to piece together our family story. So, a brief history of relief in the United States. So caring for the poor was certainly not a new concept in the United States. In fact, the system of public relief or welfare, it dates back to the Elizabethan era poor laws. Publicly funded welfare was not really done at the county level. We don't really get that on the federal level until the New Deal. There are a couple different types of relief that's going to exist in the 18th century, 19th century. So that's going to include outdoor relief. You're going to also have pauper auctions. You will have poorhouses as well. Now, the people who are running these institutions, kind of managing the relief on the county level, these are going to be the overseers of the poor. So they were elected officials that managed money, and they decided who qualified or who they deemed deserving of a relief. And they also managed the local poorhouse. Now, there is one thing to keep in mind. Not everyone who received relief or welfare lived in the poorhouse. There were many who received things like outdoor relief, which would mean that they're receiving money or clothes donated to them by people in their community, but they're still able to live in their homes. Others who were bound out were two families until their debt was paid. And there were others who were put into hospitals, which we'll get into a little bit very soon. When you're looking for records that would shed light on the lives of destitute ancestors, try to be a little flexible in what you consider a poorhouse. So be a little fluid with that term. Now, I'm using the word poorhouse right now, but you're going to have many different words for it, which I'll get into in a moment. But you're going to want to look for things like admission and discharge records for specific institutions. Apprenticeship papers are also useful because children were often bound out to apprenticeships to get them out of the poorhouse or out of an orphanage. Some early examples I'm going to show y'all actually come from hospital records because hospitals are often an overlooked resource. Many of the residents of poorhouses, especially in the 19th century, were considered mentally ill. They had medical conditions. Some had disabilities. Some of them were women who were dealing with unplanned pregnancies. And there were also elderly people who had no other family willing or able to take care of them. In regards to the mentally ill, I will say this, by the 1840s, there was a reform movement for the treatment of the mentally ill that was organized by people like Dorothea Dix. These are reformers who wanted to remove individuals who were deemed mentally ill from the poorhouse and put them into hospitals. Because of this, it's best to consider looking at historic hospital records as well, because those hospital records are sometimes functioning like a poorhouse. These are some of the other names for poorhouses. They essentially mean the same thing. So you're going to have an alms house, a poor farm. You're going to look for asylum records, pauper records. Old age home is another one, or county old age home or county home, because sometimes these poorhouses are also going to be precursors to what we think of today as a modern day nursing home. So where can you find these records? Now, this list on the right, this is not an exhaustive list of where you will be able to find these types of records. However, we are going to go through all 6 of these bullets in detail, because I hope that if you're struggling to find records for your destitute ancestors, this might spark some fresh ideas. Also, if you have ideas that you would like to share with all of our friends in the chat, please do so. Like I said, we aren't going to go over every single place you could possibly look for these records relating to your pauper or destitute ancestors, because that would be a very, very lengthy program. So I encourage you to share ideas and resources that we might not go over right now. With that said, let's just jump on in. So the first thing we're going to talk about is family search. Now, I know many of y'all have used family search before, so we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive, not too deep, into their catalog so you can see what types of poorhouse records you can find. Now, when I have searched through the family search catalog before, I've had the best results from this page when I search only by keywords. Now, for this example, I only searched poorhouse. I didn't include like Poorhouse, Alabama. When you add place, it doesn't work. So if you want to narrow it down to a geographic location, just do Poorhouse, Louisiana, Poorhouse, Alabama, and so on. It just works better. Can't really give you a reason why. Another thing I want to point out about this page is that I like to start with searching just what's available online. Now, I don't recommend limiting yourself to online records at all. But I like to see first, what can I get my hands on immediately to kind of get the ball rolling? After searching just the term poorhouse, I have almost 6,000 results. Since I didn't include a location-specific keyword in there, this search results list will include international records. You can see we have Germany, England, and so on. But I just want to give you guys an idea of what this would look like. Another thing I want to point out is that you should try to search for these records under some of the other names that I mentioned for poorhouses that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, such as Alms House, Poor Farm, or County Home. A lot of the searching those words will come up with very similar search results, but sometimes you might get more. It kind of depends. So try variations of keywords. Sorry, I got muted for a second. So we're going to take a look at some records I found in this list that I found super interesting. As a native New Orleanian, I was super excited to see some records of the Charity Hospital and mission books from the 19th century that were digitized on Family Search. So I thought this would be a good example of some more unusual poorhouse records. So like I said, let's not be too strict on the definition of a poorhouse. So for a little bit of context, Charity Hospital, until it closed after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, was the second oldest public hospital in the country behind Bellevue Hospital in New York City, which only opened a month prior. Since the last poorhouse in New Orleans closed around 1870, Charity Hospital would continue to serve as a poorhouse of sorts for the city for a very long time afterwards. One thing I want to point out about this catalog entry is that if you look at the notes, it will typically tell you where the original records are located. This is super useful if only a portion of the records are digitized and you need to find the section that isn't digitized. So this gives you an idea of where to find this locally. Now, I will say this, and this might be a little nitpicky of me. I know for a fact that these records are not actually in the New Orleans Parish Courthouse. They're in a completely different building called the Orleans Parish Clerk of Court Research Center and Historical Records Office. Now, that is very specific. The thing you have to do is, even though this isn't entirely true, at least points you in the right direction, you're going to have to call around. So don't hesitate to call, but don't assume that this is definitively where they must be, right? Now, when you scroll down the page, that catalog page a little bit, you'll see a list of which microfilm reels they've digitized. We're going to look at two different pages from separate volumes because there's actually a difference in these admission books I want to show you. So the first one I thought we would take a look at is volume 1, The Lunatic Asylum. The reason why I strongly encourage y'all not to ignore these hospital records, because oftentimes, like I said, hospitals like Charity doubled as a poorhouse. So another thing I want to bring up is that not everyone, and especially not everyone in the 19th century, who are labeled insane actually had a mental illness. You're going to have people living here who are destitute. You're going to have people living here who had other medical conditions like epilepsy, or maybe who struggled with substance abuse issues, who are placed into hospitals or insane asylums. In addition to, and that's not even mentioning the countless women who were deemed insane for a countless number of reasons, like postpartum depression, for example. So definitely take a look at records like this. So when we click on this book, this is what one of the pages will look like. This is what many of the pages in that first volume will look like. So this page is from July of 1841. We take a closer look, we can see the patient's name, their occupation, where they're from, how old they are, last from, so where they were living, if they're married, what disease they might have. In this case, everyone on this list, they're going to be labeled insane. There are two women on this page that really stood out to me when I initially looked at this. The first one is a woman named Betsy. So Betsy, she is listed as being a slave. She was residing in Charity Hospital and she was deemed insane. What I find interesting about Betsy is that she is the only person who is listed as a slave on this entire page. I haven't had the chance to do a deep dive into Charity's records yet, but I am kind of curious about Betsy's story and what happened to her and how did she end up here to begin with. The second woman I want to point out was a woman named Barbara. Now, I am not entirely able to read her last name, but we can see that she is from Germany. Like Betsy, she is a resident of Charity Hospital. She's 27 years old. Now, in the disease column, you see she's insane, right? Like Betsy. But all the way on the right, the cause of the disease, it says disappointments. Now, if we look at Barbara's entry, all the way on the left-hand side, it says, I know it's very small, but it says that she was discharged in March of 1862. So she spent 20 years in Charity Hospital and was released when she was around 57 years old. Like I said earlier, not everyone, especially women who were declared insane, were actually mentally ill. I don't know the full story on either of these women, but if you have an ancestor that just disappears from records, you're not really sure what happened to them. Did they move? Did they die? Did they change their name? There is a possibility that they could turn up in records like this one. It doesn't hurt to look. While Barbara's supposed cause of insanity was disappointments, there are countless others in this book who were supposedly driven insane by destitution. So this submission book is super juicy with information. Not all of the books have this much information. So I want to quickly go back to that list in the Family Search Catalog and show you what most of the other books for Charity Hospital look like. None of these other volumes have as much information as this first one. So if I was to just pick volume 18, for example, this is what we're going to see. This register book looks very different from the one we were just looking at. If we take a closer look, we can see that these volumes are more like an index to the original admission ledgers, because it looks more like these are page numbers next to names. While this isn't the same like juicy information that we had with that other admission book, you could take this information and contact the Orleans Parish Clerk of Court Research Center office and try to hunt down the original ledgers, assuming they survive this long. Not everything will make it to be, make it to present day. You will have fires, you will have floods, especially in New Orleans, you will have floods, but you can still contact these offices and see, do they still exist? Where can I find them? Another thing I want to point out about this catalog entry is the locality subjects down here. If you aren't seeing exactly what you're looking for in your initial search, just try clicking on the locality subjects relating to poorhouses, poor law, etc., and see what comes up. So when I did that, I came up with this page. Now, I was kind of interested by this register of indignant insane, register of inmates, because this commissioner of police and public buildings, I had never actually heard of this government entity before, so I was kind of curious about it. When I looked through it, I actually found some really great examples that show the admission of people who are destitute into hospitals. So let's take a look at that. This is on a page from 1865. We see 3 patients listed on this page. Each entry is going to list the name of the doctor, which my French is not particularly great. And I believe this is Dr. Piquet, I guess, or Piquet, probably Piquet. It will also say the name of the hospital. So CDA, this is actually an abbreviation for a hospital called Coeur d'Afrique, which was the only hospital for the Black community in New Orleans at the time, and it later became the Freeman's Hospital in New Orleans. You also see what they're sick with, so it says that all 3 of these people are destitute, that is their physical illness. It also shows the last known address. Now, the truly unfortunate thing about this particular register book is that the people listed on this page are not actually given names other than colored man, colored boy, colored man, because they're not white. But if I was researching one of these individuals, I would then try to locate the surviving records of this hospital, which would have the names of these patients, and try to cross-reference the 2 books. So next, I'm going to show you all 2 other examples from another hospital, but these are going to be a little bit more recent in time. So this will be from the early 20th century. So we're going to take a look at the Philadelphia General Hospital records. Since like I said, we were just looking at those mid-19th century records, I thought y'all would like to see something that maybe isn't quite as old as the 1840s or 1860s. So we're going to look at 2 receiving ward record books from 1908 and 1909. So this page is from the 1908 receiving ward book. Here we see a woman named, I think her name is Edith M. Lewis. She's 34. She's white. She's from Philadelphia. Her occupation is housework. She, under the symptoms column, no home, came in with above baby. And this is the above baby. So this is Mabel Lewis. She's 2.5 years old. Says she's a healthy baby. This column, number of admissions, this is the first time they've gone into this hospital. One thing I noticed is that in this assigned column, Mabel was not in the same ward as her mother. This is the children's asylum. So this probably or potentially means that this child was taken from her mother when they were admitted into the hospital. As depressing as this entry is, it's really important. It's a really important breadcrumb that you can follow to find out more about this girl, what happened to her. So this kind of gives you an idea of maybe what other records you could start looking for if you're trying to figure out what happened to this daughter. So this is from the 1909 register book, and on this page we see even more people whose symptoms are described as no home. So we have Patrick. He's 74. He's from Ireland. He's a stonecutter. In the symptoms column, he needs a home. We also have William H. Johnson, 70 years old. He's from DC, so Washington, DC. He's a laborer, needs a home. John, age 56, laborer, needs a home. All three of these men, they are basically being admitted to the hospital because they have nowhere to go. But notice that by 1909 standards, these are not young men. It's important to remember that in a world before Social Security, poorhouses or hospitals like Philadelphia General or Charity Hospital in New Orleans that function like poorhouses, they were often a last resort for older people who might not have had a family to care for them, or in the case of these men who are doing physical labor, they might not have been physically able to keep working, and therefore they lack the financial means to retire in the same way that we think of retirement today. So with that in mind, many poorhouses would become what we think of today as nursing homes. So those were just a few examples of what you can find on Family Search. I promise there is way more on Family Search aside from hospital records. I just wanted to show y'all that sometimes records for individuals like the people we're just talking about who were destitute, they're gonna hide in some unusual places. So let's move on and talk a little bit about some of your local and state resources. As y'all know, there is a lot that hasn't been digitized yet. So things that you're not necessarily going to find on something like Family Search. So your biggest resources for these types of records are going to be found at the local level. So we're talking libraries and city, county, and state archives. So let's first talk a little bit about libraries. While I definitely recommend contacting libraries and localities that you believe your ancestors were living, it is still 100% worth your time to check out what the Genealogy Center has in our collection, even if your family is not from Fort Wayne. Now, I know a lot of y'all watching today are from Allen County or the surrounding area, so I am going to share with you this really great free database we have for the Allen County Poor Asylum Registers. We did a few updates on our website a little while ago, so I'm going to briefly walk you through how to find this particular database. After you go to our website, which is genealogycenter.org, you can either click on this big green button down here, which is our resources, or you can click Explore Genealogy, and there's a drop-down menu, and you can click Our Resources from there as well. From that page, you'll see free databases. You'll click there, and Allen County, Indiana resources. So these are things you can access from home. You don't need to do this in the library, and you definitely do not need a library card. After you click on that link, if you scroll down the page, you'll see institutional records. Here you're going to find two links to two different indexes for the Poor Asylum Registers. So the Allen County Poor Asylum Registers, they're going to be in 4 books. So that first link will have books 1 and 2, and the second one, 3 and 4. These are searchable, which is great. So I don't personally know anyone who would have been in this particular asylum, so I just searched my own last name. I typically search everything search surname by fuzzy. So that way I don't accidentally exclude something that I'm actually looking for. When I searched Hodges, these are the names that came up in that first index. So these are going to be from books 1 and 2. So you'll see the number in the front says what book it is, and the number in the back says what page number. So you can take that information and then go pull the microfilm rules and find the page you're looking for. This is a page from volume 1, so let's take a closer look at some of these entries. Here we see John Stadler. It says that he's foreign, we don't know from where. Cause of admission, destitute. Health and fitness to labor, good but lazy. Unfortunately, when you start digging into these records, that is an expression you will see a fair amount. But I think it's important to remember not to judge our ancestors by today's standards or the standards of the individual who is making the judgment calls when they're filling out register books like this one. So for those of you who might have had an ancestor that had children that disappeared and you can't seem to figure out what happened to them, whether they died or went to live with a relative, this is actually a really great example. Here we can see Maggie Slater. She is American. She's 10 years old. She's destitute. She was admitted in 1885. If we go to the other side of the ledger in the notes section, we can see that she was taken to be raised by a man named Anthony Sorg, and it actually says where in Allen County that they moved to. So while I don't know the context of how Maggie ended up in the Allen County Poor Asylum, we do know that she went to go live with this other man, this other family. So if she had family who's doing research about her and she just disappears, we know what happened to her in this one moment in time. And that can kind of help you move forward. There are other instances where children are going to be born in institutions like this. So in the absence of finding birth certificates, you can actually use records like this as a birth record of sorts. So here we have Maria Shannon. She is Irish. She's 17. And when she was admitted, she was pregnant. In the notes section of her admission, it states that she delivered a female child September 19th, 1857. And it also says bound out to Jonathan Dorsey, October of 1858. Bound out in this context essentially means that she was working basically as an indentured servant. It's unclear whether the note is referring to the child, to the mother. Even though children were often bound out, it seems unlikely that they are binding out an infant. So it's probably referring to the mother. So this is just one collection of records we have on microfilm, but we have a lot of other stuff also in book form. So let's take a look at a few examples of books that are outside of Allen County, aside from this next one, before we move on to some other local resources. So one book that we have that I find actually really interesting is this Allen County Infirmary Deaths book. And this dates from 1937 to 73. So this relates to deaths in the institution we were just talking about. Now, this entry for John Lee is a little bit unusual because it includes a newspaper clipping about the circumstances of his death. It says that he died on South Harrison Street in Fort Wayne. He was found in a doorway. Now, I know a lot of y'all are thinking, do they only have Allen County related poor records? No, that is not true. We have stuff relating to other states as well. So let's take a look at a few other examples. So this book is an Alms House register for this county in Illinois. Many of the Poorhouse records that we have are transcripts of the original records that local geological societies or independent researchers, much like yourselves, have compiled. While I am on the subject of geological societies, I should briefly mention that if you're having trouble locating records, you should try checking with the local geological societies, because sometimes they might be privy to ongoing projects that might actually help you with your research. For example, just last week, I was reading the summer issue of the New York Geological and Biographical Society magazine, their summer issue, and it mentioned that the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library in New York just digitized 15 of the Erie County Poorhouse ledgers. So you should definitely check with those local groups. It doesn't hurt to reach out to people. You lose nothing by doing that. Now, the cool thing about books like this is that they often contain more than just a register. It'll include things like history of the institution, information on the financial status of the institution, and sometimes we'll have transcripts of census records that will show the residents in that particular census year. For example, this is what 2 different pages from the inside of that book we were just looking at look like. We have an alphabetical register over here on the right-hand side, but there's also all this other extra useful information as well. This is another book from our records. This is for an alms house in Prince George County, Maryland. This book has way more than just admissions and discharges. For example, you'll see on that the first pages you'll have in section 1, this is a commitment journal and papers, and you'll have commitment papers as well. So these are going to be letters that are kind of, they're more, you're going to see this within the institution, but it's going to talk about someone who is being admitted into the institution, and it can give you context for what is going on with them. Why do they need to be in this institution? There are other sections in this book that will include things like burial permits and what records you can find at the Maryland State Archives. So books like this are super useful. They're a lot of fun to look at, in my opinion, but I think a lot of strange things are fun. The last example of Poorhouse records that I'm going to show you from our physical collection is actually one of my favorites because it includes some really juicy information. This book actually has, it contains a history of the county home. It has photographs, documents, which are actually photocopies of obituaries of a few people who died in the institution, as well as actually photocopies of death certificates for the people who were mentioned in those obituaries. And it also includes a journal of somebody who I think might have lived there. So as far as transcriptions go, this book, here's kind of an example, one of the pages. This book actually has an index in the front of the book, which I find actually really useful. It makes things a little easier to find things. So let me go back. So that's just a handful of Poorhouse records we have in our collection. I included a much, much longer list in the handout, but when you look at that list, don't think that that long list is comprehensive. We have more materials in our collection that I could have possibly included in the handout. If you want to know if we have Poorhouse records for a specific county and you can't find it in our catalog, please, please, please don't hesitate to contact us. If we don't have it, we can at least give you some advice on where to look for the records, assuming the records are survived. Now, aside from the Genealogy Center, I strongly encourage all of you to contact your public libraries in the area that you're researching. After I decided that I wanted to use an institution in New Orleans as an example for this program, I actually found an article about the history of vagrancy in workhouses in New Orleans. And the footnotes of the article actually indicated that the existing workhouse records are located in the New Orleans Public Library. So after searching through the library's page, I found this list of finding aids that will contain records. Well, it's finding aids to their workhouse and poorhouse records. So there are 2 lessons here. Always check your public library. And it pays to learn more about the world your ancestors lived in. So it pays to read those secondary sources. So next we're going to move on to city archives. If you have an ancestor who you do not believe was living in a rural area, cities like the Philadelphia City Archives or the New York City Municipal Archives, these are going to be great resources to find records. One city archives Alms House collection that I'm really impressed with is actually the New York City Municipal Archives. So their digital collection of Poorhouse records is massive, and it can be accessed for free from home. Because of the significant percentage of immigrants in these New York City institutions in the mid to late 19th century, these records are really helpful for finding records that relate to our poor immigrant ancestors. Now, the way to find those, the way to basically find the New York City Municipal Archives, like Alms House letters, is actually using their linked finding aid. I put a link to this finding aid in the handout because it's not really the easiest to find from their website. You could honestly just Google New York City Municipal Archives, Alms House letters or Poorhouse letters, and you'll find it, but finding it from within their website is not the easiest. Finding aids are your friends. Never forget it, my friends. Finding aids are your friends, no matter what city archive you're trying to work with. Now, the reason why this finding aid is so important is because it has links to the actual pages you're looking for. This is the simplest way to access these ledgers because you can look for the book or institution you're looking for. For example, this is for Bridewell, and the date range you're looking for, and just click on the link on the right side to go directly to that digitized ledger. You aren't going to just find admissions and discharges here. You're going to find deaths, you're going to find state census records, bond registers, and you're also going to find hospital admissions as well. When you click on these links, this is what you're going to see. This particular ledger is a child admission ledger. In the description, it explains what the columns are labeled as well as stating that for this ledger, most of the children in this particular volume are under the age of 2 years old. And the remarks column mainly gives time of death for the infant. So I zoomed in on this page so y'all can get a better look, but you can also open the book in full view as well. This is what it looks like. Thankfully, you can still zoom in on the pages. However, there's no feasible way to download these images, not easily, not without potentially paying a fee. But this is still a really great resource to use. So, as y'all know, not everything's going to be online. At some point, you are going to have to contact county archives and county courthouses to find poorhouse records. Not all these records have survived over the years, so it's important to talk to somebody who works in the courthouse and the archive to find out what records still exist and where and if they can be accessed. Aside from actually calling people on the phone, a great place to start is by poking around the county clerk's website or the city government's website, because sometimes they'll actually post what they have relating to poorhouse records. For example, I found on the Chester County, Pennsylvania website links to these finding aids and indexes for poorhouse records. It also has like history of the poorhouse, outdoor allowance. It has some really great stuff. So I want to see what one of these looked like. So I clicked on the admission books. This is one of the finding aids. This is honestly more like a really detailed index because it has name, age, race, where this person was living, actions taken by the directors, whether or not they helped the person, bound the person out to be apprenticed, whether or not the person died there, the date of admission, and various notes. But more importantly, when you want to see the original, it has the book and page number. All the things we love, right? This is for the Genesee County archives. So this is in New York. They also had links to finding aids on their poorhouse, on their website. So here we see indexes to the county home deaths, county home inmates, mortuary notes. for the sake of my own kind of curiosity, I wanted to see what county home inmates looked like. This is their index for the county home inmates. This looks more like a transcription of their register book. It's pretty detailed. It makes me wonder if the actual register book has even more information. But notice at the top of the page, there are almost 2,000 pages in this document. So this is a really, really great resource that you can search through, and it can help you find the original copy. So this is kind of an example of some of the county websites that might have information like this. But more often than not, you will probably end up still having to contact the county clerk's office or archive directly for more information. Another thing that I want to mention about contacting the county clerk is that sometimes there aren't necessarily separate poorhouse records. In some instances, these records are just going to be mixed in with probate records. This is a catalog entry from Family Search for Humphrey County, Tennessee court case files. The locality subjects say poorhouse, poor law, but when you look at what film has been digitized, it doesn't actually indicate like separate like poorhouse records, land property records. So that means it's all mixed in there together. So that means you're going to have to dig. But no one said that we got into family history because we thought it was easy. There is nothing more satisfying to me, in my opinion, than digging for a while and then finally finding the record that you've been looking for that confirms some things for you, that maybe gives you new information. So I just want to make you aware that sometimes it will not be as simple as calling a county clerk and saying, I'm looking for poorhouse records, and they have them all separated out. Oftentimes you will have to dig through probate records. State archives are another great place to look for poorhouse records in the event that the county decides to turn over records to the state. When I started digging into county archives, I realized that many of the county records offices in Illinois turned over their records to the state of Illinois. When you go to the office of the Illinois State Archives website, just searching Alms House, the number of county Alms House register indexes show up. To show you an example, let's take a look at Mercer County Register Index. After searching through this, you'll see the resident's name, age, date of admittance, and register number. All of that can be used to obtain copies of the original ledger from the State Archive. The last suggestion I have for y'all today, because we're a little low on time, for finding what happened or finding some records for your destitute ancestors, is to look at the 1880 Supplemental Schedule 7. I can't talk, I'm sorry. Supplemental Schedule 7 for the defective, dependent, and delinquent classes. What a mouthful. This is also called the DDD schedule. There are other federal censuses prior to 1880 that have columns asking if someone had a disability or if they were a pauper, but 1880 actually has its own supplemental schedule for that. If your ancestor was considered destitute or a pauper in 1880, they should appear in the regular population schedule. If for some reason you can't find them, then I would, and you suspect that they might have been poor, check the supplemental schedule. The reason why I have this circled in red is that if you can't find them on the population schedule, but you find them in the supplemental, this actually says the number that they were taken from Schedule 1 for that county. So that can help you maybe find them on the regular population schedule. Now, these census takers, they were by no means perfect in their enumeration, and sometimes people got missed. So, but it still doesn't hurt to at least check the DDD schedule just in case. One place you can search for that schedule is actually on Ancestry. You can either just Google 1880 defective, dependent, and delinquent schedule Ancestry, and you'll find the page you're looking for, or you can find it in Ancestry's catalog by searching in keywords 1880 federal census schedules, and it'll be right here. Now, you can search through this page the usual way, first name, last name, but if things are not coming up quite the way that you want it to, if you're not finding really what you're looking for, you can browse by state and by county. That is kind of a last ditch effort because that will mean you are looking page by page. Now, here's the catch. Not every DDD schedule is on Ancestry. They don't have schedules digitized for every state. So these are the states that they do have. The Geology Center does have schedules for a number of additional states on microfilm, which I put a link to our microfilm catalog in the handout that will show what states that we do have. But if you can't find the state you're looking for in Ancestry or in our library, you can contact the state archive or state library. I included a link to the handout that has a list from NARA's website that has the name and contact info of every single state archive. So definitely contact them if it's not on Ancestry or if we don't have it. So this is what one of the pages looks like. This is from Jefferson County, Illinois. This is their Alms House. For the sake of finding examples, I typically, like I said, search my own last name. This is not someone related to me, but we have someone named Margaret Hodge and Ella Hodge. It says that they're able-bodied, they're not habitually intemperate, they're not epileptic, and neither of them have been convicted of a crime. We can also see over here that they're admitted in 1880. If we look all the way over at columns 19 through 22, this asks what other family members of these individuals are in this establishment. We can see that Margaret is Ella's mother, and then Margaret also has a son in the Alms House as well. But notice he's not listed on this page. This could be a mistake on the census taker's part, or her son could just be on another page. This is another example. This is from the Ashley River Asylum in Charleston, South Carolina. The reason why I wanted to point out this page is because this column right here, this is supposed to indicate the month and year that somebody was admitted. The record we were just looking at didn't have the month, and it didn't even have the year for most of these people. So I wanted to show you an example that had that filled out. But sometimes the census takers really just didn't feel like writing all that down. So it might be blank, but this is still a useful breadcrumb. We'll see that this person was admitted, looks like February of 1878. So this can give you an idea of when, if you're doing a timeline for someone, when did they show up in this institution? So I just want to conclude by saying that while we might be able to find records for our destitute ancestors, it is impossible to know exactly how these people experience life in a poorhouse or similar institutions by only looking at official documents or the views of the affluent or the views of reformers. Oftentimes, even people who are reformers, they will have opinions and agendas that are going to differ from the views of the community and the poor. So to get back to my point, these records might fill in some gaps for your family story, but let's try not to forget that these were people. All we can really do as family historians is look at the data in front of us, analyze it, and try to put it in the context of the time period, because our ancestors didn't live in a vacuum. It's not really our place to judge them, but the more we can kind of understand their world, the more their stories begin to maybe make a little sense to us. So with that, and we have a little bit of time, are there any questions?